What's happening, everybody? It's your man, Michael Andreula, up in a podcast studio, pushing, believing with Dr. Joseph Luciani, a clinical psychologist for more than 35 years. He's written international best-selling books on self-coaching. He's published it in 9 different languages. He's got articles all over the place. He's got a lot of great articles right on his website, but there have been magazines. They've been in Oprah Magazine, Redbook, USA Today, Fitness, Health, Shape, Body, and Soul. He appears frequently on national TV, radio, the internet, and your man's podcast. So go out, support it. Thank you so much for pushing, believing. Let's learn how we can coach ourselves to push to a different level. That's incredible. Do you feel like you need to have extra things in your life, things that fascinate you to keep you excited about life?
Well, that's a great point. Absolutely. I feel I'm a very passionate person. And to me, excitement and passion, without that, you're facing a kind of, I think, a mundane, dreary kind of existence. I think the spark comes from the passion, and the passion comes from connecting. When we connect with things adequately and from the heart, they kind of innovate us and just really accelerate, our whole connection to being alive and happy.
That's fascinating. So you dive so deep into self-coaching, and that's really important. I'm a kickboxing instructor. I teach a lot of beginners. I train instructors. I try to coach them in a way, because almost the default mindset may be contradictory to what you recommended as far as when working out. I know the Boston Marathon story really resonates with me, because you're doing the run, and all of a sudden your body you don't want to do it anymore. And I see that in fitness so much, and myself included. Is coaching yourself really the key to this? Because there's a voice in your mind that's either giving you come on, let's do this, or let's just stop and go in a hole.
Yeah, that's why, to me, being a therapist, I started out as a classical Jungian therapist, studied in New York for about 10 years, and I found therapy to be too passive. And I'm just more active by nature, and decided that one of the things that I saw getting in the way of people's improvement was that they tend to get mired in their own kind of cyclic negativity, doubt, fear, and always played. I've been an athlete. I played football. I was a pole vaulter and all that kind of stuff. And I really felt that you really need to motivate somebody in therapy, just as you would on a football field, to really not concede to depression, to really kick butt when it comes to anxiety. So my job, as I see it in both my writing and my practice, is not only to give the tools, but to incentivize someone that they really can fight the good fight. And I think that maybe one of my typical go-to aphorisms is whatever it takes. You want to feel better? Okay, then whatever it takes. If you have that mindset, and you're a kickboxing instructor, if you have that mindset, you're going to overcome the hesitations. You're going to overcome that you which wants to just move the other way, but you have to set your mind first, and I think that mindset is very important.
Another thing that was compelling in the books is the idea that you can't put so much energy into the problem. I'm restating it, but if you're feeling anxiety, you can spin this even worse by just putting so much focus in on it.
Let me jump in on that, because you're absolutely correct. But what happens is that once you start to spin it faster, it's almost like a snowball. As it rolls down, it gains more snow. It's a cumulative effect. And once you start conceding to self-doubt and negativity, you start to just get further and further involved in pulling yourself away from that resiliency. So yeah, it does feed off itself after a while, and we become identified with our own problems. We see ourselves. I just finished up with a young man who has been so identified with a low-grade depression for years that this is how he defines himself. And he was quoting or trying to quote a Zen adage saying that he couldn't remember the adage, nor have I ever heard it, but something about fish can't be a bird or something like that. So he feels he's this fish. He's always been underwater all his life, and he can't become a bird. But the fact is that he really isn't a fish. That's the depression. Remove that, and his birdness would be right there.
Well,
you get the drift.
Yeah, I do, and I really appreciate when you use analogies, because in his mind, if he's underwater and that's just cycling through his mind, I'm underwater, or there's a burden, there's a weight, it starts becoming real. And some people believe words don't matter, but they really do.
Yeah, they shape us. And not only, the three catchwords for me are doubts, fears, and negatives. When you have words that support doubts, fears, or negatives, you're not just having a thought, you're also changing your chemistry. And people don't realize that. A negative thought has an electrical chemical event in the brain. Now, one negative thought, is not going to be a deal breaker, but do that for months at a time, and you are actually changing the dynamic of the brain structure. You're becoming more susceptible to depleting the neurotransmitters and chemicals responsible for balance, and you're actually stimulating yourself to move in a more kind of depleted direction, both emotionally and physically. So that's why I try to help people understand thoughts are important. They're not just emotional, or they are also physiological. Take responsibility for your thoughts. When someone is incentivized to realize that every thought counts, it kind of puts you in an empowered position to fight a little bit harder and say, wait a second, stop, cut it out. Why am I going down? Why am I spinning this? Cut it out. And those are the kinds of, I think, initial steps that are important to just start to separate you from feeling like a victim of your own thoughts.
Why do you think depression exists? Why do you think, or is it a concept, or, I mean?
It's a label. Basically, what I would define depression as, think of a bucket with holes in the bottom. Stress, life circumstances, insecurities like little holes in the bottom, will allow the fluid in that bucket to drip out. So over time, you're actually depleting chemistry. So the end result of that depletion is both emotional and physical, and you are literally, and quite literally, working at an imbalance. So depression is a label that describes the imbalance created emotionally and physically by the duress of our life. Now, we either feed that or fuel it, or we starve it. That's really the key. The key is that, in my estimation, anybody can become depressed, given the right circumstances, or in this case, the wrong circumstances. A depression will eventually ensue. It's like a form of, like the water torture. Over time, you will become worn down. Circumstantial stress will do that. But it's not just stress, and this is a very important point. I try to make people understand that life stress, as unpleasant as it is, won't generate a depression or an anxiety unless you connect insecurity with that and start to interpret that from an insecure vantage point. Then that coupling of life stress with insecurity is what promotes the depression or the anxiety.
Is there maybe a perfect ritual you do every day, or you recommend every day, for people that maybe they're not depressed, but they just want to feel better? Is there a lifestyle that maybe would help foster that?
Yeah, there are many things that would encourage one. Exercise for one. Endorphins. So getting the essence of what would encourage change is hopefulness. If you are able to embrace a hopeful attitude, and along with that would come doing things that are encouraging to both your body and mind, eating properly, exercising, educating your mind, doing things that are constructive. If you start to embrace an attitude that whatever it takes, I'm going to start fueling myself, my body, my mind with positive influences, this will have a cumulative effect. the backbreaker of any insecurity, of course, is hope. And as you know from my books, I see insecurity as the source, the ground source of everything negative that follows. When we are insecure, which is inevitable in life, everybody has some degree of insecurity because no one grows up in a perfect world. When we are insecure at a developmentally young age, we try to compensate by being in control. So the compensatory tools that we gravitate toward, for example, worrying, rumination, perfectionism, avoidance, these are all responses to insecurity. We're trying to protect ourselves through compensation by controlling life. So it's really the controlling life that creates and generates the inner stress that ultimately wears us down. So really the ultimate answer is letting go of trying to control life and trying to be more reactive, living life, being more spontaneous. And anything that fosters that spontaneity is really a constructive and instructive kind of activity.
I couldn't agree with you really more. And I was just thinking about how this book needs to be read by so many people, and I gift it. But I think people enjoy. Do people almost get a certain satisfaction out of being depressed? Do you feel that maybe that's people give them more love, or they get more attention in that way? And it
Well,
just
that's very astute. You're absolutely right. There are secondary gains for being dysfunctional. And sometimes that is being a victim, and people will come for a while. People do get tired, and it gets old after a while. The person that is constantly moaning and groaning, at first everybody comes and, oh, what's wrong? Can I help out? But eventually, people don't like to be around people that are a drag on their own lives. So eventually it wears thin. But people will become perpetually disabled if they're looking to be rescued, and it's an interesting concept. You're right.
Well, you must run into this continuously. How do you operate your life without running into people that kind of say, "Can you please help me?" Maybe you're just out, or it's a friend of a friend, but they really don't want to be helped. Can you help somebody that doesn't want to receive the help?
Yeah, it's an age-old question, and probably the answer is no, you can't. In self-coaching, it becomes an emphatic no. I will only work with someone who wants to feel better. For example, coerced treatment, someone that's forced to come to therapy because the courts are ordering it, or the parents are ordering it, or some such. I wouldn't pick up that kind of person, because my program is motivational at heart, and it requires someone to fight the good fight. So you will stay mired in anxiety and depression if you insist on embracing it. I know even with hypnosis, people say, well, you could trick people into being hypnotized. I guess there are ways where you can counter that lack of motivation. I don't insist on having the motivation. That's my job, is to motivate and stimulate and incentivize. But I do insist on someone wanting to change. To me, that's really critical. And, I love the adages too. And when the pupil is ready, the teacher appears. So it's when someone is receptive, that's when all of a sudden you start hearing the messages you need to hear.
Yeah, I figure you really need to get people almost into some extreme situations that would be extremely costly, or where they finally change. There's no shortcuts, but they almost have to have a life experience that forces them to want that change. So I'm feeling like the worst thing could be complacency, where you don't have to change and you go through an entire life cycle feeling bad and generally, pulling down from others, not to vilify them anymore.
Yeah.
How do you deal with this? Because you're involved with this all day. Your clients are depressed. Does that? I'm extremely sensitive. I feel like I would absorb some of that.
Mm-hmm. I once had my training analyst had once mentioned it. I thought it was very poignant. He said, we deal with a lot of poison, and it's very important to really not let that contaminate. Now, I went to the first actual at the time was the first professional school in the country, and it was started by the Psych Association. And one of the things that was imperative was that we had our own analysis, group analysis, personal analysis. Afterwards, I went to the Jungian Institute, had my training analysis for 10 years. I took my own therapy very, very seriously. But the most important thing when working with a lot of poison is your focus. I never get caught up in someone's pain because I'm always looking at what it's going to take to turn them around, to get them over their depression. So, it's for me, someone may be very upset, but I'm not focused on their being upset. I'm focused on what am I doing to help get to the other side of that fence. So I'm always really, even in the worst of circumstances, I'm looking toward the optimism. Every problem to me has a solution. Now, do I help every person I treat? No. But I feel that even everyone that walks through the door, I feel that there's an equation that possibly can be solved. I just can't do it alone. I need that cooperative spirit. And not everyone responds to my approach. Some people want to be, handheld, and some people want to be coddled, and it's what I call a palliative kind of therapy. If someone wants to come in, and from kickboxing, it's a matter of saying, "Come on, let's get this done." And that's the kind of person that I like to work with. But I'm not affected, and that's because I keep my head above water. I don't get sucked into the personal or the subjective, and I see what I do as really being helpful. So there's the optimism, and God willing, I'll continue to use that as a means of making people better than their depression or anxiety have led them to believe. You mentioned something before, which I want to just get back to, and that's that people become identified with their own depression and anxiety, and they start to feel, this is who I am. They're actually identified with. They don't. That's okay. They don't really recognize that there's an option to be different. So, in which case, of course, they maybe have never known or can't remember a life without anxiety or depression. So it's hard to convince a person like that there's another world waiting for them because it's the only world they've known. But anxiety and depression are not natural. They're not necessarily something that we're born with. Sure, we have dispositions and tendencies, but a genetic predisposition isn't a life sentence. It's just a tendency toward, just like alcoholism or obesity or anything else. These are tendencies. We have to manifest some type of input to make those into destinies.
Do you think this is being developed through nature, or obviously not nurture? Your parents. My mother was at times extremely depressed. So as a small child, do you see that? I kind of rebelled against it and tried to be extremely positive. Do you feel that as you see people, role models, if they're depressed or they're not coaching themselves, you run into more of these issues?
Yeah. Let's take the nature-nurture thing. As I was getting at before, we come into this world with genetic predispositions, whether it be how tall we're going to be, or if we have parents, children of parents with anxiety or depression have a higher percentage of depression and anxiety in their lives. Yeah, okay, the genes will set the stage, but again, it's not a life sentence. For the genes to manifest themselves, there has to be life circumstances that we either accept or embrace that will facilitate that expression. Even with schizophrenia, I know it's been said that oftentimes it will take a traumatic experience or a life experience to bring that out. It just remains dormant. But with anxiety and depression, you might have a tendency. My tendency was always toward anxiety. It's why I got into psychology in the first place. My mother was very controlling, very anxious, God bless her. But I grew up very worrisome, very controlling, very perfectionistic, all that controlling stuff. And it was who I thought I was. If you had asked me at 21 if I could possibly imagine being the person I am today and feel as good as I feel, I would have thought you were high. I wouldn't have believed it for 1 second. But, we do change stripes to spots when it comes to anxiety and depression.
Fascinating. I just caught something. Are you from Hoboken by any chance?
No, but right near it.
Okay.
Up in North Jersey.
I just got a taste of the accent. That's very nice.
That's not a compliment now. Come on.
Yeah.
I've been working all my life to kind of suppress that accent.
You got to embrace it. That's
Where are you from? Where are you calling from?
Hoboken.
Oh, you're in Hoboken.
Yes.
Oh.
Where are you, by the way? In case people want, can people come visit you or make appointments?
I have to ring the bell first. Yeah, in Crestkill, New Jersey.
Crestkill, fantastic. Not too far. The idea of God comes into play in a lot of the interviews that I've been conducting lately, and I guess an atheist. I'm not sure. I try to have faith. I like the concept of leaving it up to God, because there's so much. It's just mind-boggling how many things that could go wrong in the world. You just have to say, let's leave it up to God. Do you have a standpoint? Do you think it's healthy to raise people with certain religious notions, and possibly do you think it's instilling guilt or any of the depression as a small child, teaching kids possible religious? I mean, I've grown up with 12 years of Catholic school, so you could form some feelings of guilt.
Yeah.
Do you have any stance on that? Do people struggle?
Well, just religion in general. I feel that it is important to have a foundation, a moral foundation, which most religions teach. And right or wrong, I think it's a good foundation. I have absolutely no problem with dispensing that. I too am a product of parochial school. But I do feel like if you think of a wheel and the spokes on a wheel, I think, all the manifestations of religion are different spokes, but they all lead to the same hub, to the same essence, luminosity. And if you or this is a podcast that you produce?
Yes, we normally do it live, but okay. This also goes out video and to iTunes and bunch of other probably have.
So I would encourage your viewers to read Joseph Campbell if they're at all interested in kind of an all-encompassing kind of view of the collective aspect of religion. I'm always fascinated. For me, religion has been a struggle. It's never come easy. At most of my life, I kind of saw myself as agnostic. Do you know the agnostic's prayer? It's, dear God, if there's a God, hear my prayer. But I'm still not totally in sync with my belief, and yet I will never give up on that, because something compels me to search that out, to find that. I think it's, as I get older, I continue to find that as almost a haunting need to resolve that issue. It's just, and I'm not saying it's my fault, but I just never was able to just really accept and really bring that into my life. Maybe because I think too much, maybe because I was a controlling person or a worrier. It's hard to put down, a factual basis for religion. And unfortunately, that's the where I come from is the show me state. Give me some facts.
I envy people that just are completely in the faith, because every other possibility has been eliminated and it seems to be completely comfortable. But if you go through life without questioning, it seems like my mind is set to question, so I should do that.
There was a movie, I guess it was, maybe in the 80s or 90s. It was very poignant. I think it was an Irish film. And there was this priest, and he was sitting under a crucifix, and he was having a crisis of faith. And he's breaking down. He's looking up at the crucifix, and he's yelling at Christ on the cross, saying, "If I could know what you knew, I would go to my death willingly. But I can't know what you knew." So he's more or less saying, of course, you can crucify me tomorrow if I could have that same factual understanding of what God the Father or that
That
guy.
is one of the most brilliant movie quotes I've ever heard. Actually, that's incredible.
It's much more poignant in the movie than the way I'm presenting it.
No, that's incredible. I need to research that movie. What we always have tons of book shout outs. We love to have people read, pick up audio books. Most of these are going to be listeners. So we'll make sure we have all the links for your books, which are fantastic. People listen to this, and myself included, for $10. One of your books, it's a no-brainer. Even if I take one idea out of a book, I feel maybe I even overstimulate myself with books, but I feel like the more times, more reps I get in on self-coaching and concepts, I feel good. Do you have any books that you think are just fantastic that you read, you recommend, you reread, not even in psychology, maybe dinosaurs, fossils?
Dinosaur books, right? The two books that were most pivotal in my development growing up, one was Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, and I'm blocking his name. Modern Man's Search for Meaning.
Yes, Viktor Frankl.
Yeah, Viktor Frankl's book, Eckhart Tolle's book, The Power of Now. There are many books that have influenced me. Joseph Campbell and all of his works, the hero's journey and all of that. It's Campbell's works are life altering. And by the way, there are some. I guess they're still Googleable. Joseph Campbell did some interviews with Bill Myers at the Museum of Natural History, I guess in the late 60s. And there was a series of about 4 of those. And they're just staggering. Campbell, by the way, was also, before his death, he was the influence behind Star Wars, which your viewers might be interested in. Because of the mythic aspect of Campbell's interest, he developed the whole, the dark side and Darth Vader and all the hero's journey. So he was a profound influence. He and George Lucas met, and Campbell was able to help with the mythic aspect of Star Wars. So yes, Joseph Campbell. Hermann Hesse was good. As I said, Siddhartha, Journey to the East. A lot of very insightful. But Siddhartha, everyone should read. I like the Zen essence of things, and combining that with everyone's journey, it's just very fascinating for me.
I read that you do yoga. Do you still actively do yoga?
I sure do. Not very well, but. I just found a men's class, and I was telling the instructor I was so delighted that I had always been in a mixed class, and finally I got into a men's class and I didn't feel so inferior. When you're in a class with women, they're so pliable and flexible. You just have to say, what's wrong with me? But the men's class, I felt, wow, I'm pretty good.
I don't know, Doc. I like the mixed class myself. Your speaking style. I don't want to say it's almost Martin Luther King-esque. Do you model yourself or watch any speakers before? I'm thinking about the interview you did with 90 Second.
Oh, I don't. I've always felt that I didn't want to be too influenced by anyone else because I didn't want to get congested with whether I'm saying someone else's words. When I first started writing, here's an interesting side note. The first self-coaching book I came out with, I had a patient who said to me, "Wow, you must be a big fan of Beck's and." The rational emotive therapy. Alfred, I can't think of the name right now, but he said you must be a big fan of these two psychologists, and I said no, I've never read them. And then I of course went back and took a look at some of their works, and I said, my goodness, if I had read either of those books, I probably wouldn't have written my book, because there is a tremendous kind of similarity in terms of the intent. Where my books and my work is different primarily is this concept of control. I think cognitive behavioral therapy has a lot to do with changing the way we think and frame things. But understanding control, to me, that's the grand unifying theory. It's trying to control life vis-a-vis For example, worrying. Why do we worry? Well, we're trying to anticipate. We're trying to brace for ourselves. We're trying to anticipate by looking into the future. That's trying to control. And it's all based on self-distrust. So when there is inadequate trust, we're left with, well, how do I control life? And then we start gearing up and we start straining and we do all these things. We worry, we get involved in fears and doubts. And we're just trying to protect ourselves from life because of this lack of trust, which is, of course, a byproduct of insecurity. So the end game in self-coaching is to develop self-trust, the willingness to risk being reactive to life. And the way I describe reactive living is if you're in your car and you get behind the wheel and you say, oh my gosh, what if I hit a squirrel? Should I turn the wheel? Should I hit the brake? So you're getting all congested with these what ifs. Reactive living is getting in your car, turning on the music, putting down the window, driving along, and believing in your heart of hearts, if a squirrel runs in front of my road, I'm going to trust that I will react spontaneously in that moment to take care of myself. And that's, we're survival machines. We congest everything by overthinking, anticipating, worrying. That's distrust. By trusting ourselves, we hand ourselves over to our instinctual, intuitive capacity. Makes all the difference in the world.
That's incredible. So one quick tip for the drivers. I've always been told that if you swerve, that would be extremely dangerous. It'll take you off the road. So be careful with the squirrels. But it seems like it's a constant. Marcus Aurelius in his book Meditations. I don't know if you've read that book. Obviously, he's a Stoic philosopher. He says he has to remind himself almost every day, a couple times a day. Do you have a way of anchoring that into yourself? And then I know you got to run. So is there a way to remind yourself?
I would have to say that life is an unfolding, and we tend to drift, of course, towards our old habits, and you can learn and further yourself, with each and every success that you have. I do remind myself quite often to sometimes let go and enjoy more, become more involved. So there is an awareness. I don't think we ever get there. I don't think we ever really reach a point where we could, let go of the steering wheel. I think that we participate in life. My life, I would have to say that I'm a happy person. I love my life. I love my wife, my children. I'm blessed. I was a very unhappy person, very unsatisfied, very pessimistic. So I've evolved, but I've also learned to embrace those things that I have, not the things that I don't have and the things that I might strive for, but the things I have, to appreciate the things I have. You mentioned the philosopher. I'm thinking of Epictetus, a second century slave. Really worth reading. He said things that almost come out of a self-coaching book. Essentially, what Epictetus said was that it's not life that brings us to our knees, it's how we interpret life. And coming from a slave, that's a pretty profound statement. Life, stress, circumstances, they don't define us, they don't make us depressed or anxious, they don't lead to a failed life. It's our judgments, our interpretations, our perceptions. We control our destiny. Whether you work in a ditch or whether you are on top of the world by being a star of Hollywood film, all life can present challenges, but only we can decide if we're going to let those challenges affect us negatively. So we're always, the capability of really being in control of our destiny is I think, very accurate. If you're aware, if you realize that really I'm not a victim of life, I'm not powerless. To be empowered is really just recognizing that the choice is always there. There are always options. Negativity is an option, pessimism is an option, but so is optimism. So maybe getting back to your question too, I would say that I choose always to find the optimistic reaction to life.
Fantastic. On that note, I mean, I think you really summed it up. People need to get out, get the book, empower yourself. It's much much more freeing to feel good and not have yourself underwater or
Right.
just
But let me tell you, your viewers, when you purchase my book, buy two of them in case you lose one.
but in case you want to read it a couple times. Yeah, and I'd watch all. Definitely watch some of the. I've watched most of the YouTube clips. I find YouTube clips fascinating. I use YouTube for education, and I believe we keep putting out these positivity tapes and thoughts that people actually can use and help themselves and network and start building maybe a positive spiral of energy. It sounds a little crazy, but I think it could help.
That's great. Yeah, I'm trying to put together some more clips. I'm just getting involved in social media. If I could get what you and I are doing today as a clip, I'd love that. So
Of
keep
course.
me in mind. But you're right. For me, I'm an old dinosaur, and this is a new world, for me with the social media. So it's you've got to get it out there. I have found, and I say this in all humbleness, I have found that I've affected, and I feel really blessed to have affected so many people from around the world, because the books are translated in 8 languages. And when I realized that my silly little life has now expanded and has been able to really change people, that's profound. I mean, not what I say is profound, but it's very profound to realize that you've made a difference. That's something, it's just, of all the gifts in my life, to know that I've made a difference. And I say that humbly, because I really feel that's been the biggest gift of my life.
I feel like you made a capsule of energy, and if I read it, when you were writing it, that energy kind of I feel like it's infectious, and then I go about my day considering everything. And the most important thing you did is you put these things on audiobooks as well. So people that are driving, they're in traffic anyway, now they can pop in the audio. You can get the books on Audible as well, and make sure you go there, rate, review it. We'll certainly put this all on social media. You don't need to worry too much about getting involved, because they'll find you.